So, a slightly unusual start to maybe an unusual project this week. So, my proposal for you is there's 3 stages. The first is a transcription of a painting by Goya, or that is to say, of the head of a portrait of the Duke of Wellington by Goya. And then the next stage would be to produce your own portrait head of someone from whatever source, and I can help with that. And then the third stage, if you're interested, if you wanted to develop something into a portrait for the Scottish Portrait Award, we can discuss that. But I'm just starting with a bit of tech advice. I've sent you a link to the National Gallery website, the National Gallery in London, and if you put that into your computer, you should come up with this page. And I just wanted to talk you through it because it's an incredible resource. So we've got the Duke of Wellington there. I think this is what you get first. And if you look up, you might have to, I'm tapping my mouse pad to get to these, this symbol here, which means that you can, if you left click on that, you can put this into full screen, so it takes away all the stuff around the edges. And then if you move your mouse cursor on the screen, it'll also show you this, which allows you to change the scale. So if you can work with a screen, you will be able to go from getting the head at that sort of scale, so you can see all of the head, and this is what I'm going to demonstrate in a moment, to eventually getting up to this sort of incredible detail where you can see eyelashes and other, what do I do to that camera? And other details. So that's just to talk you through that so that you know how to use this, which is a kind of amazing resource. I've also attached to the email some photographs of the painting. One where you can see this sort of scale, the whole head. I don't think you should worry about his uniform. I think this should be an exercise in painting his head. And then one which is much more detailed, where you can look at, as I say, the kind of shine on the surface of his eyes, or those eyelashes. Just look how there's only half an eyelash on either side. Anyway, it's a great resource, and I dare say you can look at all sorts of paintings on the National Gallery website. Right, so I'm going to set up now to paint and talk you through that transcription process. Okay, so I'm set up to work. I've actually got a book, but I'm hoping you'll be able to work with the photocopy that I've sent you, that you'll be able to print it off. In this book, it's got what I've sent you, the detail of the head, but I'm starting with the view that takes in a lot more of the painting, because I don't want to see too much at the beginning. And I have got my laptop here as well, so you might be able to work with a screen or with a print off. I think it's a really terrific example to look at, because Goya, as I understand it, was a very quick painter. He painted quickly and loosely, so you can look at a detail and you can really see what's going on with the brush strokes, the contours around the areas of the head, and then these incredible details of features. But you can see how it's done, and I think it's probably done in a slightly systematic way, meaning I think he started with dark and gradually worked towards the light. So there can be with a transcription, but also just with painting a portrait or painting any subject, I think it's valuable if you can deconstruct your subject a bit and think, right, what do we do first and what do we do next? So here's my canvas, and I think Goya probably would have started on some tinted canvas. So that's just a rag, whoops, with a bit of burnt umber on it, and I've dipped it in the white spirit and got rid of the white. I've also mixed up some grey, and that's what I'm going to start with. So I think the first stage, and for the grey I did some ultramarine and some burnt umber and a bit of white. I've got this sort of brush, about number 4, and I'm only going to work with his head and neck. So there's a little bit of drawing out. This I keep nice and fluid, so I can change it. So we've got a 3/4 view, his head turned so that his nose is over to the left, and got fabulous strong eyelids. So working with this grey, I've just got to get things plotted out, and I've made it nice and dilute so that I can rub things out if I don't like them. And I've just got to get things sort of plotted in proportion. So that is the first stage, and as I've described, I'm going to work from dark to light, and probably work from slightly thinner paint to thicker paint. So I think that is the sort of old master approach, the traditional way that Goya would have worked. And as I've said, what's a little bit distinctive and helpful about looking at Goya is he painted very quickly. So there's a kind of impressionistic quality to a lot of his brushwork. So it can be easier to read, to interpret. I see I'm getting a bit of a shine there, so I'll change my setup in a moment, but just to get you to that first stage, and I'm doing it all in grey. So I'm doing a kind of tonal bit of painting here. And then I'll get some colour for... I would next make up maybe a bit of a shadow colour, but I would like to get some of those planes in. So it's a great lesson in paint, but also in heads. So we've got a 3/4 view, his nose is over to the left, with these very distinct planes on the side of the temple, under the cheekbone, and under the chin. It's useful, he's got his kind of polar neck thing, so his neck is nice and distinct, and he's got quite a high back to his costume. May as well get all that in. And what else to say about that then? I mean, my proportions could be better, and since this is a transcription, I want to get the maximum out of this observation. So there's a few changes I should probably make at this stage, which are easy to make because we're working in monochrome. And that grey, so I mixed the umber and the ultramarine and some white. So this isn't the darkest tone that I can make. I can make something much darker. So I can establish a few things in grey, put it on, take it off, depending on what I see I need to do, and then still be able to get darker and lighter. So there we are. I mean, I think that's as much as I want to do at that stage. Not least because I want to encourage you to be quick about this stage, or to put it differently, not to get drawn in to too much detail. So what you see, eyes half closed, or a view like this where you've got all of the head rather than any of the detail, that's the thing to start with. You don't want to see too much at the beginning. And of course, what I'm saying applies to this transcription, but it would apply to the next painting that you go on and do. And now that I think about it, would it be an idea to get rid of, maybe, while I've got the grey, I should get some of that in. I'm not sure what colour the background is in this painting. It's I think it's a mixture of warm and cool greys. So when you look at it, sometimes you think it's brown, and then you think it's purple or violet or something. So what I'm trying to do is make a bit of a distinction with my grey. So my background grey, I'm rubbing it in a bit, and that's still, but I'm bringing it right up to the edge of the hair, into the face, but it still means that I can get back that edge, because there are some amazing edges in this painting, which you can see very nicely in the detail. Okay, so that is stage one. And as I say, you'd be doing this for Wellington, but you might also do it for your own portrait. Stop. Maybe just he's got a wee bit of a sideburn I'd like to get in. There we go. Okay, I hope you can see that's a bit shiny. There we go. Okay, pause there for mixing some. So I've mixed a bit of colour. I'm going to start with darkening the hair a bit more. So for that I've used a bit of burnt umber, and I might have put a tiny bit of blue in. So I'm going to darken the hair, and you can see it's mixing. I'm working wet into wet, which I think is what Goya did a lot of, because he was so speedy. And so it's mixing a bit with my grey, and I think that's okay. This is what oil paint's all about, letting things mix on the surface. And basically I'm going to go from slightly thinner start to thicker paint later on. So I'm quite happy for this to mix. Now I've made a shadow colour. I'll send you out those handouts with some of these mixtures. This is a familiar one to many of you. It's orange and cerulean with a bit of white. And I'm just checking the book over here, because I'm putting on that pattern of shadow. And I'm using the same colour. I've got, a single strength shadow colour with a bit of shadow in the hair as well. So I'm blocking that in. And I'm using the same colour on the side of the nose. So this is, I think, the best way to proceed, because it means that everything is unified, and it means that you're going from a simpler, more general start to eventually much more specific variations in colour. But anything that's a shadow that I did with my grey, I'm now using this single cerulean orange and a bit of white colour with. So you can see that that unifies things. I might actually get the ear filled in as well, even though the ear is much warmer. The ear's got some of the red and orange, a bit like in the cheek. But I'd like to get rid of that light space there. And I think I'll also get a little bit of that along this edge. And the third colour that I've mixed is a much lighter colour. Again, on the hand art it would be the orange and the cadmium yellow with some white. But this I've also added a bit of brown to it. I've added a bit of burnt umber because I don't want to put on my lightest tone yet. I'm trying to talk you through things in a gradual way, but I've already talked about deconstructing this subject, deconstructing the painting a bit. And when I look at the detail, I can see that the lighter areas, for example, on Wellington's forehead, on the tip of his nose, they are slightly thicker paint sitting on the surface of the painting. And that's something that I want to do towards the end. So I want to hold back on my lightest tone. I want something that's light enough to stand out on my tinted canvas. But I want to have somewhere to go higher and lighter. And also what I ought to talk to you a bit about as well. Again, if you look at the detail, just to deconstruct a bit what Goya was doing, there's a certain amount of modelling contours, going around the cheek and up and down the nose and around the forehead. So there are brush strokes which describe those contours. There's another element down here, which is he's got his 6 o'clock shadow. So that'll be another kind of slightly local colour, but which comes later. So initially it's really now just getting some light and dark blocked in, and I know that will feel in some places frustrating, as though that's not what I can see. Why am I doing it? Why are you doing it? Because you have to start generally. In order to keep the unity and in order to gradually work towards some emphasis, you have to start generally. If you start with eyelashes and pupils and irises and things, then it'll all fall apart and you won't know where to go next. So that's almost all of that. So I think what I would be inclined to do next is just one or two of those local colours. But no, change my mind. I think it'd be good to get some white and black down here. I think they're quite helpful because they're obviously a stronger contrast, which I think will help when judging the colours in the face. So I'm going back to my greys, made from the burnt umber and the ultramarine. I'll make myself a black and a bit of grey and maybe some umber and a touch of orange. Just so we've got a nice light. I've got to learn time lapse because you're waiting for the next paint. I'm going to have to speed this up, but anyway, this is worth seeing. So down here, he's got this darker black. So the paint's wet, it's mixing. If I hold my brush a bit more parallel to the painting and don't work the paint too much, then it won't mix too much. So that's that. Bit of contrast there. And then some of the grey in here, that could be even lighter. It'd be nice to have that much, much lighter. Which I'll probably have to add a bit more white and a bit more orange. Get this extra light down here, which I think could be a good. So I'm convinced this is a valuable exercise because you can start to relate how paint is mixing on your canvas in your version to what you see in the details of Goya's work. So pause while I mix up some colour for the cheeks and maybe for the 6 o'clock shadow. So I think it's probably time actually to look a little bit closer now that I've got in those main areas of light and dark blocked in. And the next thing I want to do is get some of this warmth that if you look at your detail, if you look on the National Gallery page, there's a lot of warmth in the cheeks. It's also between the light and shadow in the nose, along the edge of the nose. It's in the eyelids. So I think the key thing here is to, although we're now looking in a slightly more detailed way, is to try and keep things general. So I'm just working wet in wet to mix in some of that warmth. And looking at Goya's approach, I can see that there's almost a direction to the brush strokes. So it's kind of a combination of blending it a bit so that it integrates, so that the colours work. The colours harmonise a bit, but not working it in so much that there's no colour anymore. But this is the beauty of oil paint. I've worked in some of it, and I now, with a cleaner brush, can top up one or two places. I could have done with a slightly orangier colour, I think. Let's make do with that. And there are other places, as I've said, and often this warmth, you see that painters put it between the light and shade. A little bit under there as well. Oh, that comes down there. So I probably should adjust my colour a little bit more. I think it could be slightly orangier. But let's just get it, spread it to all the places where I've seen it. So as I said, there was some up on the lid here. And actually there's some along there. There's it here. I mean, if you look at the detail, wherever there's a shadow area meets a light area, that's where that warmth is. So I also made a slightly darker one. And I think that's what I'm seeing, which is sort of outlining the nose a bit. And it might be a bit stronger. So these are reds made with the cadmium orange and the alizarin. Okay. And then some of that I want to just... I blocked in the ear, which we can't really see here, but I'm now painting into that shadow, ear shadow colour with some of my warm tone. So there we are. Right, so pause, and what I'll do now is I think I'll get some colour into the eyes. I might, yeah, I need to paint some whites of the eyes as well. But let's strengthen the eyes a bit next. Now this isn't finished. I'm just feeling my way a bit with how those colours work. So I'm going to start with the pupil and iris. And from my shadow colour, which was the cerulean and the orange, I've added a bit more cerulean, which makes it a little bit bluer, a little bit cooler, and I'm seeing this eye as firstly that dark shape, which is going to get darker still in the pupil, and then a bit more colourful in the iris. And then eventually there'll be, he's got a kind of check of light in on the lens. So that's the sort of middle colour to position the eyes. And it's very interesting, if you look at the painting, the detail, I don't think these eyes line up. And I think there's a trick that portraitists do. I know Sargent has it in Lady Agnew, where you look closely at the eyes aren't lined up. I mean, they don't look cross-eyed, but I think it makes them dynamic. I think it makes them move a bit. So I've got some dark, which might not be dark enough, and I'm just going to place a pupil. And certainly whatever I've just said about the eyes not lining up, the pupils don't line up. But I said all that because I wanted to talk about the whites of the eyes and lining the eyes up. So I think actually I put that dark shape was wrong, but the pupil will be okay. Anyway, so going from light to dark, and then I've made some whites to the eye, which is a grey, and I'm just I don't want it to be too cool, because I don't want it to stand out too much. So just bringing in a little bit of contrast, and I feel, you know, when you're doing this, it should be kind of feeling your way a little bit. So don't do anything, well, make it all a bit provisional, because I think with eyes what you have to do is move them around a bit until you get, not just get them in the right position, but also you get the right sort of contrast. Yeah, so before I do anything else, I also want to put the colour into the iris. And again, if you look at the detail, I'm always telling people this, because of the eyelid casting a shadow on the eyes, what painters tend to do is put the colour of the iris in the lower part of the eye. And you can see that that's what Goya's done. So I've got a little bit more colour there. It was the orange and the cerulean blue, but actually I got more and more blue into it. So if you think about it, these colours are all related. Now those eyes don't quite work, partly because they need an eyelash. So I'm going to go back to my shadow colour, possibly even to the hair colour, but we'll try the shadow colour first. And I want to get a line along here for that bit of that eyelid. And the same over here. Something like that. So it could get a bit darker, and now that I look, that same colour, I think I'll use it just at the top of the lid. So this is dangerous territory because I'm getting drawn into eyelashes, but it's necessary to have all those elements in the eyebrow, to have them contributing. But if you can think about still going back to things, possibly when it's dry, that's what I've got to work out. But I think I can do a lot with that shadow colour. When I look around these eyes, he's got a little bit in the, is it the tear duct in there? That one goes right round to the corner. But I think it's valuable if I can demonstrate using basically the same colour, so that things are unified. It's in the nostril, but it's not dark enough in the nostril, and it's also not dark enough for the inside of the mouth and the back of the nostril as well. Right, so darker than that, I mentioned. The colour I've used in the hair, which is just the burnt umber. Maybe it's got a tiny bit of blue in. And I think that could be stronger in these eyelashes. Maybe a bit in the eyebrow. And again, because it's oil paint, you know, we can mix it on the surface. I wanted it in the nostril. And remember, of course, as you paint wet in wet, what's on the end of your brush won't be clean anymore. So you've got to refresh it. Possibly wipe your brush. Okay. Pause again for thought. So, still trying to keep general. I want to get in some of these shadow colours around the mouth and get some colour into the mouth. So they're particularly dark there at the philtrum and above the upper lip, into where I can just mix that a bit. I don't want a moustache, but I do want a little bit of that cooler colour at the lower part of the face. So I'm letting that mix a bit. And also, I don't know if you can see, I'm going in different directions. I'm following a few contours with my brush marks. And then I've also, to go with that, I've made some colour for the mouth. I think this mouth is amazingly simple. There's just a lot of bright colour on the lower lip. Something like that. And then a slightly darker and less colourful upper lip. And mouths and eyes, you know, they're got to keep your nerve, because you can get silly expressions. That looks like lipstick. You can get starry eyes. You can get lipstick. Men wearing lipstick. So what do I have to do? I think I've got to chip away at that a little bit, the top lip, and get a bit of light below the lower lip, or it's maybe part of the lower lip. But for that, I've still got my first colour that I put the light in with. So that can come along here, because I think his expression is all in that lower lip. Or the mouth, the expression of his mouth is down there. And then, I don't know if the top bit doesn't have to be quite so clean. Just to shape that. And it's a 3/4 view, so this left half of his lip is very foreshortened. And then like that, and the Cupid's bow, whatever. And that should be a bit more shadowy again. So I think that's actually quite a useful demonstration of painting that mouth, partly by doing the colour in the upper and lower lip, but equally by working with what's around it. And there's even one last thing. This bit of light here. These bits of light that you get around the lips are quite important for an expression, I think. Okay, so I'm going to have to pause again, because what I need to do next, I think, is show you some light up here and a bit on the nose. And then now that I've warmed up all of this, I think these shadows look a bit too cold. They need a bit of warmth in. So that'll be one more thing to do, I think, and then probably leave it dry or leave it a while. Okay, a couple of last things for this stage done quickly, because I'm taking up a lot of your time. So I've made a lighter tone, a kind of highlight, really. And that is particularly on the forehead. I'm working it in a bit, knowing that when I come back to this when it's dry, or drier tomorrow, I'll probably top up some of those light bits, but they are, it seems to me, on his forehead. The tip of the nose, and it's funny, it's at that bit of the chin. I don't understand that bit very well. And a little bit at the back of the nostril. But the forehead is the brightest, and once I've worked wet in wet, the paint that's on the end of my brush is no longer clean. But that can be quite useful for other places. So I can have a kind of hierarchy of the brightest, which is clean paint, floated into one of these places, like the tip of the nose. And then once that's not clean on the brush, other places that aren't quite so bright can get a little bit. But I'm saving this till last, because hopefully that means that everything else is fairly unified. I'm not getting drawn off into bits of detail. And I can keep that hierarchy. And then the other thing, and I could have done it in either order. I could have done the lightest bits first and then the background, as I'm doing, or I could have done the background first, but it's well worth getting in this darker background to help what you've done stand out. It's darker, it's also a bit more opaque. I've mixed some ultramarine and some burnt umber, because an important part of sort of resolving this painting is going to be to do with the edges between the background and the head. So that is very helpful. I possibly should have done it sooner. And you'll see in the painting and in what I'm trying to do here, it's fairly close between the background and his hair. His hair was made with burnt umber and a little bit of ultramarine. The background is made with burnt umber, ultramarine, and a bit of white. It's very slightly lighter, but they're pretty close relatives. Okay, I'm going to leave that now to dry a bit, and then try and do one or two things tomorrow as a final addition. The eyes could be better refined. In fact, he needs a bit more of a lower lid. Okay. Well, there's still time. What would it be? Keep the brush clean and the paint clean. Just my original sort of lighter colour. That really needs to be along here a bit more. The rim of the lower lid. You knew that. You watched and waited. When would that happen? And here it is. And I think now, now that I've developed those eyes, I probably could lighten the whites of them. But that's it for now. So I have gone way over my time, and I've got to be very quick just to do a couple of last things. But the point is, what I'm working today, Sunday. What I've painted for the rest of the time is a little bit drier, not completely dry, but it means I can put another layer on in places. And I've done one or two things since I switched off the camera. There's a slightly more orange mid-tone, which I added here and down here, that I warmed up the face with a little bit. And I've started to darken the background as well, which actually was quite dramatic. And I'm sorry I didn't film that, because I think it's quite interesting, very interesting to see what the impact of certain things are. So just to change the background can have quite an impact. And the impact here, I think, is because I darkened this background, run out of paint, because I darkened that background, it really made the light stand out. But I didn't bring it right up to the edge of the painting, the edge of the face, because when I look at Goya's work, you can see that it's not a sharp edge. So I think there's a bit of a transition between the lighter background I had and this new slightly darker background. The other things that I want to do are get a bit more light, really to top up some of the lighter areas. So I can see this bit of his forehead is much lighter, and I'm going to put the paint on thickly there, float it if you like, and then maybe try and spread it out a bit around the edges. But I want it to meet the colours that are there already. It needs to connect with them. And I think I'll top up that bit of light on the nose as well. And where else? That's almost it, actually. Maybe a little bit down here. So I'll do those things, and if I then stand back and find that they're too much, I'll either scrape them off, which is quite a good thing to do. If you scrape off, you keep the kind of texture, the freshness. But I'll leave it like that, I think. Let's have a bit more on the nose.
I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs.
And then the other thing I want to do is a little bit of light in the eyes. So firstly the whites of the eyes. I think the lower part here, that's very bright. When I look at this detail of, particularly of the eyes, it seems to me that there's been a little bit of scraping as well of the paint, or spreading it out maybe with a knife rather than a brush. If you look at the surface of the lens of Wellington's eyes, the paint is sort of scribbled across, and I think that could be done with a knife. I'll do that in a second, but before I do that, I'll put that check of light in the eye. I think the irises need to be outlined a bit. I think there's a slightly darker edge to the irises. I think my brush is a bit too big, yeah. And a little bit down here. So it's kind of outlining the irises a bit. The irises have got some colour, but they also have a little bit of an edge to them, particularly that one there. And so lastly, let's try a little bit of light on this, on the surface of the lens. Now this should be just tiny. A bit there and a bit there. And if that's too much, I think what's on the white of the eye is a little bit too much. So what I'll do, and this is part of the process, is just to lift some of it off. So that I've still got the same colour, but it's slightly less. I suppose by scraping it I also make it a little bit more translucent. You can see through it. And because some of the paint is dry underneath, actually, if I went too far with other things, I can scrape a bit. So I think that is where I'm going to stop. This was the transcription then of Goya. Goya's Duke of Wellington, which I think is a really valuable exercise if you can deconstruct his painting process and do things in a certain order and then try and remember them and have a go at a head of your own choice, your own material. And if you need any help with finding images to work from, I can send you some photographs. You could try a self-portrait, or you could work with some images of someone that you know, or just find some images. This was a 3/4 view, so he's looking slightly to the left, so it's not a symmetrical head. It's very well lit, so those might be things that you could look for in your choice of reference material. Okay, I better stop now. Thank you.